Okay. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here with you for another live stream. When I saw that Project Blue Book, the Project Blue Book TV show covered this case I'm about to talk about for its episode 4 of season 2, I thought, okay, here we go with one of those cases that no one likes to touch, except it's actually, it's so outrageous that you can't not want to look at it. So I'm going to read to you a paragraph from Allen Hynek, who wrote about this case and actually looked deeply into it. And as a matter of fact, he spent about 5 or 6 pages on this book. This is the UFO Experience. This is probably his best known book. There's a much younger Allen Hynek on the back. So just listen to this one paragraph where he talks about the Kelly Hopkinsville case, which is what we're going to be talking about today. He just writes, the Kelly Hopkinsville case, if considered entirely apart from the total pattern of UFO sightings, seems clearly preposterous, even to offend common sense. The latter, however, has not proved a sure guide in the past history of science. It's a good point. Blue Book records on this event are sketchy, and little or no investigation was conducted. Still, the case is carried in Blue Book files as unidentified. That much it certainly is. That's Hynek, and he goes on for about 6 pages in this book on a fairly deep, involved discussion of it. And he's not the only one. There have been a number of other UFO researchers, investigators, who have actually done a pretty deep dive into the case I'm going to talk about with you now. And as outrageous as it seems, they've come away as believers. So I'm going to describe this case, and a lot of people have gone into it. I'm doing my best to give you a kind of concise overview. It's a case that's it's from 1955. It is fascinating to read about, but at the end of the day, you really still have no idea what the heck happened here. And what strikes me about it is, well, as Hynek noticed, really, the story actually has a few genuine things going for it, except for one thing. It just seems crazy. Other than that, it's a great case. So actually, although it's called the Hopkinsville incident, it's really the Kelly Hopkinsville. Hynek was really more proper here. Kelly is a very small town outside of Hopkinsville. And let me just show you where this whole thing is. I've got a couple of visuals here to share. So this is Hopkinsville, Kentucky. You can see it's just north of Tennessee, very much in a rural area. A little close up, you can see Hopkinsville. And then Kelly, I didn't even put Kelly on the map, but it's very close by here, right at the Tennessee border, out toward the west part of the state. So that's where the whole thing happened. And let me grab my notes here so I've got everything in front of me the way I want it. Okay, so the main action is at a farmhouse. The family involved is called the Sutton family. A man named Elmer Sutton, his nickname was Lucky. He's the head of the household. There's something like 10 or 12 people living in this place at the time. It's August 21st, 1955, so it's summertime. They had a guest visiting the house. It was a friend of theirs from Pennsylvania, a man named Billy Ray Taylor. So it's not clear how many people exactly were there, but at least 10, maybe a dozen folks were in this house. It's a little farmhouse. It's about 7 in the evening, and Billy goes outside to get some water from the family well. You got to understand, 1955, rural America, a lot of these places did not have indoor plumbing. That was coming soon after. But in the mid-50s, it was still pretty common, not unusual. So you go out to the well. So Billy's out at the well, and he sees this huge object, very shiny, and he claims to have seen it land in a small gully not far, maybe a quarter of a mile. I've got a picture of it. It was a drawing that actually was done by Billy and an investigator who actually was a local journalist, first person to write about this, a man named Ledwith, and that apparently is what this object looked like. So you've got that whole thing. Let me minimize that screen. And okay, onward. So he sees this thing apparently land. He runs back to the house. He's very excited. And he reports this to everyone else at the house. They don't believe him. They laugh at him. You're crazy, that type of thing. But shortly after this, the family dog starts going nuts and barking and barking and more barking. So at this point, they're thinking, what is going on here? So Billy Ray and Lucky, they've each got guns. Lucky's got a 20 gauge shotgun. Billy Ray's got a 22 cal rifle. And again, in that society, everyone had a gun and everyone knew how to use it. They could all shoot. So they go outside and they are ready to deal with any intruders, anyone who's not where they're supposed to be, that kind of thing. And here's where it gets crazy. So as they get outside the door, they see a short creature, maybe 3 feet tall. There's some descriptions a little shorter, some a little taller. It's a creature that's walking towards them. Now, it's got its hands up, which you would think is a non-threatening gesture. I mean, I got to think, if you go across the galaxy, it could very well be that having your hands up above your head might be a universal don't shoot me gesture. But that's not how these two guys took it. They actually started shooting at the creature. But let me just give you a description of it. This is according to what they told investigators after the fact. And in fact, I've got a pretty decent visual here, a couple of them. I'm just going to show you. Here we go. I got to get better at this. And share. A lot of you have seen this image. This is very well known. So the creature had 2 large eyes. It had a yellow glow. This is their words, or an investigator's words. The eyes were more on the sides than in the face. A long, thin mouth, large bat-like ears, thin, short legs, unusually long arms with large hands ending in claws. So I'm going to show you another screenshot here. There's a front and side, like a police profile shot. It's crazy, right? And this is a 3D modeling I found on the web. Looks pretty good. And here's a nice little profile, 3/4. It's an absolutely insane looking creature. However, the guys see this and they start shooting it. And so what happens is, oh, by the way, I just want to mention, all the later accounts of this creature showed it, or were describing it as green. So this is actually a literal case of a little green man or little green men, except for one thing, which is that, in fact, the original description of it, according to the original journalist, no one described it as green. So that came later once this case got national attention. I just thought that was interesting. But anyway, so Billy and Lucky both fire at this creature with their guns. And, you know, they both said, look, we were like 20 feet away from this thing when we shot at it. There was no way we were going to miss it. But what ended up happening is that the creature did this type of a backflip, landed on its feet, and scuttled off into, I don't know if there was woods there, or there was definitely high weeds. So it ran off into that. Now, before you just laugh this whole thing off, I mean, there's one thing that came to my mind on reviewing this, and that is the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. When the Sherman family was living there, there was a case where they saw what looked like a dire wolf. That is an unusually, outrageously large wolf. There were dire wolves in the past. They don't exist anymore. There's a creature that was very large. And the residents shot at it as well. And according to this account, this is back in the 1990s, they hit it several times and it just sort of angrily, sullenly skulked off back into the woods and was gone. It's kind of similar when you really think about it. In any case, here we are back in Hopkinsville, Kelly, Kentucky, 1955. The men shoot at this creature, does the backflip, goes off. They go back into the house. I'm sure they're quite shaken, terrified. And then what happens? This is only the beginning of a long, crazy night. Another creature, maybe the same creature, but maybe a different creature. It turns out there was a lot of them. Looks exactly the same, and they see it appearing on the other side of a window. It's a screen window. They shoot at it right through the screen. They go back outside to look at it. They're like, we definitely hit this creature. They can't find it. They look up, and they do see something that frightens them. There's a clawed hand reaching down from the roof, trying to touch them. I got some images of this. I'll show you. Anyway, the people inside are screaming. They pull them in. Let me just show you this picture. It's a pretty nice artistic rendering. And here it goes, reaching right down and grabbing. I think that's supposed to be, I don't know if that's Lucky or Billy Ray. Here's another, less artistically rendered. But what I like about this one is that they've really extended his neck. So you got the creature doing a real number on this poor guy. But actually, what ends up happening is that they're brought inside, but they go back outside. And apparently this is Lucky, who comes back out, and he shoots the creature. He knocks it off the roof. There is another creature in a maple tree nearby. They both shoot at this one, and they knocked it off the limb. It floats to the ground, doesn't fall, and then just runs off very quickly into the weeds or into the woods. It's getting dark at this point. So immediately then another of these creatures, and no one knows, is it the same one that they've shot or is it another one, comes around the side of the house, almost directly in front of them. And I've got a nice artistic rendering of this one. Lucky shoots at this one. Take a look at that. And this is point blank range. And I actually love this image because this is like the classic, don't shoot me, or is it the creature trying to look big, like a dangerous, scary predator trying to come at it? I'm just kidding. I'm thinking this is like, hey, I'm not here to hurt you. Anyway, he shoots it. But what they start noticing, and I don't know when they detected this or determined this, first of all, there was no effect on shooting this creature, but they started hearing sounds like pinging, like as if you're shooting buckets, or like, you know, when you're shooting empty things off the, would make this pinging sound, but nothing would seem to happen to the creatures. So they'd hit it and the creatures would just scurry off and they didn't seem to be hurt. So you've got to assume these guys are getting a little bit concerned that the guns aren't doing any good. They go back to the house. Everyone's terrified. This is just the craziest story, right? But it's not over. So Billy and Lucky go back in, and now they're essentially under siege. So remember, it's not just these two men. You've got an entire family here. You got 5 other adults, 7 adults altogether, and maybe 3 or 5 crying kids in the house. They're all looking out the windows. They're all seeing these creatures. Now at this point, definitely multiple creatures appearing through various windows. Time and again, the beings would come toward the house, their hands raised above their head as if a friendly gesture, and the men would shoot at them. And so this happened all through the night. Their estimate was maybe there were 10 or 15 of these creatures. Who knows? One thing that I learned in reviewing this case, again, because I remember reading this originally probably 25 years ago when I first started researching UFOs, and I just thought this is an insane case. I didn't really think much of it. But over the years, I did learn that other researchers at the time surprisingly took this case rather seriously. But anyway, one of the things that I didn't remember until I started going over this is how these creatures moved. So they were described as very upright all of the time, except when they moved, especially when they moved quickly. Then they would like bend over, almost like, you know, at a kind of this odd angle, and their long arms would basically allow them to walk almost on all fours. And then the other thing that was pointed out was their legs were very stiff. And so it wasn't clear that they had knees that would bend like ours. So somehow they would move by these motions of their hips very, very quickly. I would assume it looked rather awkward to the people watching this, but that was the description of how they moved. The other odd thing, as I mentioned, is how they seem to float and do all of these amazing somersaults. You really have to wonder, seriously, like, how are you going to do a backflip if you don't have knees that bend? It's like simple mechanics. But in any case, all of this was described over and over again. And the other thing that comes out is that while they weren't glowing, they had a kind of luminescence to their skin. So they apparently were quite easy to see as it got darker. And by the way, this went through all through the night. So the whole thing started around 7 in the evening. I think that's when the UFO was seen. And through the night, this family was under siege of these, it sounds funny, really, these friendly aliens coming at them with their arms up, and every time they'd come at the men would shoot them, and they would keep coming back at them. This went on until the morning. So it might have been 12 hours. It might have been as late as 7 a.m., but maybe 6, 7 a.m. And by now, the family decides we're getting out of this place. They rush out. There are 2 cars. One is Billy Ray's. He drove down from Pennsylvania, remember? And one belongs to the family. They get into 2 cars, and they book over to the sheriff. His name is Russell Greenwell, and he's the sheriff of the town or of the county or whatever. They talk with him. They're all hysterical. He's like, calm down, people. But they persuade him, A, they're not drunk. They weren't drinking. They weren't hoaxing. They weren't making this up. He actually ended up believing that they were truthful. So he says, all right, we're going to go out. I'm going to take some of my officers. He's got 4 police officers with him. On the radio, apparently all the local law enforcement in the area, like state troopers, heard this. They come in. And eventually military police somehow nearby heard about this. According to the accounts that I was reading, as many, possibly as 20 law enforcement personnel were at the Sutton Ranch. And in fact, some of them arrived before the Suttons themselves came back with the local police doing investigation, looking around. So like this, I mean, I don't know exactly how many police officers were there, but there were quite a few. So they'll get to the farm. And this is the thing. So everyone sees bullet holes everywhere. Shotgun pellets, screen windows blasted through, bullet holes in the walls of the house, all of this. But there was no sign of any aliens whatsoever. So there's no footprints outside, no tracks of any sort that anyone could notice. There was nothing on the roof of the house. You know, there had been an alien, or actually several aliens were said to have been on the roof. Just nothing. Now, of course, you could say, well, the ground was hard. This is what the newspaper said. The creatures were very likely lightweight. I mean, if they're 3 feet tall, you have to assume they're not that heavy. Plus, they had this ability to float. So who knows, right? So, but there was no evidence that was found. 0. There were neighbors that the sheriff spoke to. This is one of the most interesting things about this for me. The neighbors did say, yes, we heard shots. And yes, we saw some odd lights in the sky. That's the one thing you can say that there's some corroboration of the Sutton family regarding this incident. But even regarding the shots, one thing that actually, I'm not saying that I doubt this, but the neighbors that were spoken to did not really hear a lot of gunfire. They heard apparently some gunfire that they actually didn't know if it was any different from firecrackers. But the fact is that there was a lot of evidence of gunfire having happened. So you've got that. Anyway, the police apparently spent the whole day there, like the entire day, because they didn't leave until 2 in the morning the next day. So in some manner, Police were at the Sutton Ranch the entire following day. They left at around 2 a.m. or 2:15 a.m. As shortly after they left, the creatures came back, according to the family. Around 3:30 in the morning, creatures are back. Family sees them through the windows. Men are shooting again. This goes on for maybe 3 hours or so. By around 6 a.m., shortly before sunrise, creatures are gone. This time, the police decide, you know what? We're going to call the Air Force. We're not going to do this anymore. The Air Force, and I believe this is the Blue Book element of the investigation, they came, but there were, as far as anyone could see, they didn't really find anything unusual or anything different. And that's the end of that investigation. So you get a newspaper account now coming out. Let's see if there's any other images here I can show you before I move on here. This is just a nice little rendering just to give you a feel for how insane this whole thing was. Here's one of the guys, and he's confronting the creatures who are drawn to look like, I don't know, cats, I suppose. I don't think that's how quite they're described. This is the newspaper, the Kentucky New Era. I apologize, it's not a great reproduction, but you can see this is the front page, and boom, this is the article. This is a better close-up shot of the article. Story of spaceship, 12 little men. So, probe today, and this is actually the house, and I've got a better image of that. So you can see this is not a fancy house. Here's where one of the creatures was on the roof grabbing one of the guys. It's not very high up. You can see that it could easily reach down and grab him. So newspaper coverage comes out, and pretty much everyone concluded this was a hoax or just a bunch of drunk people getting worked up over nothing. As the news spread, you would have random people start showing up. This became a bit of a circus for a while. We're told that cars were backed up for quite a way up the road from the Sutton farmhouse. You can imagine this is a very out-of-the-way area. I'm assuming these people were not used to having lots and lots of folks come to their house. I'm sure it was quite annoying to the family, but it also added to the carnival type of atmosphere, which helped to bring ridicule on these people. The thing is this: when you start looking at the case itself, the hoax explanation really never made sense to anybody. You got people shooting up their house, obviously causing damage. They didn't really ever try to make money on the event, although when enough people started to come to the house, apparently, I guess it was Lucky Sutton who started to ask for money for repairs to the house. Like, hey, give me $1. And like literally he was asking for $1. So that got out, and that prompted local media journalists to say, they're just trying to scam the public and make a lot of money. But I don't think, if you're going to go after these people, that's really not a good case to make there. What you do have on the other side of it is you've got 7 adult witnesses in total, all giving the same story. There were a variety of sketches that were made of these beings based on the testimony of the various people. All of them were very much the same. And from what you read about this case, these people were interviewed separately from each other. I don't know to what extent, but that was what happened. So they're being questioned alone. The testimony was quite consistent. And the other thing is that over the years, their testimony never changed, like never changed. I'm sure they're all gone now, but no one ever found evidence of a hoax. The testimony never changed. And you had quite a few investigators at the time who looked pretty deeply into this case. One was a lady named Isabel Davis. She lived in New York City. She was a very excellent researcher during the 1950s, not as well known today, but she actually went down and did a thorough interview of all the people about a year later. And she just, her conclusion at the time is like, these people were totally consistent from the story a year ago. I don't know what much else she did, but she actually did meet with a lot of the people there. There was a local radio station engineer named Bud Ledwith. This guy was very important. He was the one local person who really moved on this case quickly and seems to have been very intelligent. He was the one who met with Billy Ray Taylor and said, hey, let's draw out a picture of what you saw. That was the UFO image, a classic kind of a disc-shaped object. And I think it's fair to say that Bud Ledwith strongly believed that these people were truthful and reliable in their description. So he came away a believer. And then J. Allen Hynek, who actually communicated at length with Isabel Davis and with Bud Ledwith about this case. Hynek looked pretty deeply into the Hopkinsville case. That's kind of amazing. And one thing I have to say about J. Allen Hynek in the 1950s is he was in a very unusual position. You know, he's an astronomer for Ohio State University. He's got a very prestigious job. He's a consultant for the United States Air Force for Project Blue Book all through the 1950s and in the later 50s. And he's got this very kind of academic attempt to be very rigorous in all of his cases. But one thing I'm going to say on Hynek's behalf is that even when he was very cautiously not putting his neck out on the UFO phenomenon, he wasn't really coming out as an open believer. He really was open to this phenomenon through the 50s. He wasn't really giving the best PR for UFOs. People like Donald Kehoe and others were much more vocal. But Hynek was very seriously looking into these cases. And this is one of them. So this is one of these cases that, let's see if I have any other images here to show you. Oh yeah, this is Elmer Lucky Sutton. That's the basically. I think this photograph was kind of used against him because he's describing how the object apparently landed. Looks like he's having a good time there. But this is, I think, very much in the aftermath of the event when they're not freaking out anymore about it. They're just talking about the event. Oh yeah, and one other image. This is Ivan Sanderson, who I'm a very big admirer of. Sanderson was a UFO researcher, but also a cryptid researcher, really very engaged, wrote a number of very good books. He was an excellent writer. And here he is posing in his home, I guess. I don't know where he is, with a model of the Hopkinsville alien. You can see this was a creature that got a lot of attention back at the time. It's one of these cases where if you believe in UFOs, and if you're someone who wants to believe, like Agent Mulder, this one's going to really test you. For me, the best thing I can say about it is that it seems as though these people were honest. Unfortunately for them, there's no indication that any physical evidence of any sort was ever detected. No tracks, nothing on the roof, no sign of a landing of any craft. Now, it's said, again, I'm saying previously the ground was said to be hard, so you got that, and you'd maybe have lightweight creatures. But basically, the encounter just seems nuts to us. It's 1955. It really seems like a tale from another world, doesn't it? What was that? But then the other thing is, well, maybe this is what you should expect. After all, they're supposed to be aliens, right? They're presumably have a radically different way of operating. People complain all the time that all the descriptions of aliens seem all too human, too much of the time. Well, not this time. Now, Hynek said that Blue Book did a very shoddy job in investigating this. But even so, he mentioned, and as I mentioned to you at the beginning of this, Blue Book listed this case as an unknown. I think, again, this is one of these cases that if you're already a skeptic of UFOs, this is not going to be the case that's going to win you over. Not even close. This is one of these cases that's either the real thing, like real in some manner, that gets filtered through the experience of these folks living almost 70 years ago, 65 years ago, or there's some explanation other than a hoax. So if you rule out alcohol, which everyone seems to have done, so they weren't drunk, now we're left with some kind of possible, if you want to explain this away, as hysteria maybe, caused by misidentifying something that seemed unusual. But then the question is, you come down to what could that have been? It's very hard to say. You have to wonder what phenomenon could keep a family going all night long, and then the second night. These creatures were up close and personal as far as anyone could tell. I mean, they were right there in front of these folks, and apparently the entire family attested to it. So, I mean, I often wonder, like, wouldn't it be something if this really happened just as these people said? I mean, I've been laughing and chuckling through a lot of this because, I mean, I know it was terrifying to those people, but hey, look, it's 65 years. So I think it's long enough that we can look at this and maybe see some humor here, which I think I definitely do. You've got these totally non-violent aliens approaching with their hands up. Like, don't shoot. And these guys keep shooting at them. One thing you can definitely take away from this, and I'm actually getting close to wrapping up here, I think, is that people get scared very quickly when it comes to the idea of alien visitors. And it's a funny thing, like, you know, we talk about this today, and lots of folks do believe in UFOs, and many people do believe that UFOs are extraterrestrial. You know, a significant portion of the public does believe that. Even so, like, don't you agree that for most people, when they think about this, they can say, oh, yes, aliens are real, but it's a very safe, sort of filtered understanding of it. Like, I really have, in my own experience talking to people like that, I don't think many of them really viscerally at a physical level actually consider what it's like to have genuine extraterrestrials that might be standing right in front of them and how that might affect them. You know, I think a fear factor definitely would kick in. I think of a number of statements by people who have allegedly had alien encounters, and some of them to me are credible. But for all of them, it's not fun and games. It's a very serious experience for them. And so when people get scared, when not just people, when any animals are scared, they're going to do whatever they can to defend themselves. It's basic survival instinct. So that is one thing you definitely see with the Kelly Hopkinsville case. You have a situation where people, for whatever it was that they actually experienced, got scared as hell over what they fully believed or seemed to have believed were, well, alien creatures from somewhere that's not here, and it scared them half to death. So I don't really have an answer as to what I think about this case. You know, it's been long enough, and just like the aliens have their hands in the air, I can throw my hands up in the air and say, you know what, I don't really need to come to a conclusion on this. This is just going to go in, as Stanton Friedman used to say, I'm going to put it in my gray box. Maybe true, maybe not true. Who knows? I don't think on this one we're ever really going to know. Maybe there's a secret NSA file one day that we'll discover, but I wouldn't bet on it. That's all I've got for you. I want to thank you for joining me today. As always, I like to say, if you like what you see here, please like and share this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. That really helps me out. If you really like what I do and what I do with my wife, Tracy, in relation to the UFO subject, please visit our websites. That's Richard Dolan Press, where I publish books, and Richard Dolan Members, where we put up a lot of content relating to this subject and everything connected to it. And that's basically that. I'm constantly fascinated by the era that we're now living in. These last couple of years particularly have taken the UFO subject, which had existed beyond the fringe for so long, and, well, we're now in a position where we get to talk about it a little more openly. I think that's all for the best, and I think we're going to do everything we can to see that continue. I think it's about time. Anyway, thanks for everything. I want to give a shout out to any members of my site who are here. We did have a meetup, Richard Dolan Members meetup in New York City that happened just about an hour ago. I want to give a shout out to those folks and any other friends of the site. Good to have you here. Smash that like button. Catch you later. Bye-bye.